session. In this session we will deal with 3 case studies, 2 European cases and 1 Latin American case. The pattern is well known. The 3 presenters will have 20 minutes to present their papers, and after the 3 presentations the floor is open for questions and remarks. Now the first speaker is Professor Michael Shafir. He teaches at the Faculty of European Studies at Babes-Bolyai University in Cluj-Napoca in Romania. Professor Shafir was born in Romania, and he received his PhD in political science from the Hebrew University. And after many academic activities and also activities in the field of media, he's now professor in Romania, and he is the author of many publications, just to name 2 books. One is Romania, Politics, Economics and Society, Political Stagnation and Simulated Change. This was published in 1985. And rather recently, Between Negation and Comparative Trivialization, Holocaust Denial in Post-Communist East Central Europe. This was published in 2002. Professor Shafir, please.
Thank you. Is the mic okay? Yes. Okay. My paper carries the title From Dissidence to Holocaust Minimization, Anti-Israelism and Anti-Americanism in Present-Day Romania. And I must start with a confession. The title of my presentation is ambiguous. And not only is it ambiguous, but it has been deliberately conceived to be so. Why I chose that option will, I hope, become clear by the end of this session. I could well imagine that when glancing at the title, more than one eyebrow would be lifted. Dissidence, you may well ask? Is this man aware that communism has disappeared as an official ideology some 17 years ago? Is he aware that regardless of any criticism one might direct at present-day Romania, denying freedom of expression cannot really figure on any non-democratic leftover list? So why resurrect a term that, for better or worse, has been shelved in libraries that respect themselves, from the corner of political science to that of recent history? My answer to this question is the simplest among those I intend to clarify this afternoon. I'm not resurrecting a dusty term. My intention is to concentrate in my exemplification of present-day Romanian and on anti-Romanianism, anti-Israelism, anti-Americanism, and to do so I will concentrate on that figure who, at least to present, seems to epitomize all of these. And he happens to be Paul Goma, Romania's foremost anti-communist dissident, now living in exile in Paris. Hold it, I hear your mind crying out. How can an exiled person in a post-communist situation be representative of anything? Surely you would not claim that by living in exile, Goma could be representative of the country's official political culture. After all, official Romania is nowadays a NATO member. How could it then be suspected of anti-Americanism? I'm not going to play the wise guy and tell you that France and Germany are also NATO members. And so is Romanos Prodis Italy. No. Official Romania is not anti-American. Nor does official political culture, regardless of the color of the government in power since the year 2000, reflect anti-American values. But things become more complicated as we turn from official to the country's dominant political culture. Am I claiming then that after having waited for the Americans to liberate them from the communist yoke for some 45 years, Romanians have suddenly turned into Yankee go-home crowds wearing Che Guevara t-shirts as they march chanting, excuse the pun, bush-beating slogans? No, I'm not. All I intend to do is to explain how and why a man longing to ignored by his peers takes upon himself the task of becoming the mouthpiece of not insignificant forces in the country who see in globalization, in multiculturalism, and in political correctness nothing more than a new form of Sovietization that threatens Romanian national specificity, whatever that may mean. A third question that begs from the title I propose to this conference pertains to Holocaust minimization. Let me first clarify that minimization, as I use the term here, is an umbrella category that excludes outright Holocaust denial, but includes other forms of denying the Shoah that I developed for analyzing the phenomena in post-communist East Central Europe. I do make a distinction between deflective negationism, which strives to place the blame for atrocities committed during the Holocaust on either the Germans alone or on them in connivance with some marginal elements in society, or even on the Jews themselves. Then I have a category called selective negationism, which acknowledges with regret the past atrocities, but claims that the author's country was the happy exception. And the comparative trivialization of the Holocaust, which strives to demonstrate that the symmetry between the Shoah and other genocides, often emphasizing that genocides such as the one perpetrated by the communists against their own nation or against suppressed nations elsewhere had far more criminal and were far more criminal in both size and intention. Paul Goma, in different postures, may be said to fit into each of these mutually non-exclusive categories. In my book on Holocaust denial, I have provided examples from Romania and elsewhere, and time constraints force me not to reiterate them. But I hardly mentioned Goma there. There were two reasons for that. I confess that the first was sentimental. Paul Goma has long been a personal friend. The man who used to be called Romania's Solzhenitsyn by his countrymen was quite unknown in the West when he was forced to seek exile in France in 1977. I believe I'm not wrong in saying that I was the first to explain to the West who is Paul Goma in an article published back in that year in Index on Censorship. Sorry. Others followed. Goma's slip into Holocaust minimization started sometimes in late 1990s. I prefer to turn my head, the more so as at that time there certainly were other, more ferocious deniers to take care of. But the second reason was that I was reluctant to join a chorus in which my voice would have been certainly dissonant. Goma, once admired by all, that did not dare join him in his audacity to stand up against the communist regime, was largely ignored by his peers after '89. They did not even care to invite him back to Bucharest and to restore to him membership on the Writers' Union. Slowly but surely, in his French exile, the writer turned into a bitter and often unjust critic of his Romanian peers, including his former benefactors. There was a constant war between the sides. I did not need to be part of it. But in 2002, Goma published, first in the form of 2 articles, then in book form, 2 volumes, one claiming to be a novel, which it is not, called Bessarabia, the other a so-called historical essay called The Red Week, that undoubtedly can be called Holocaust denying as well as US bashing. As a member of the Elie Wiesel Commission on the study of the Holocaust in Romania, I could no longer remain silent. The signatories of that commission's report, as well as a plethora of other intellectuals, are now being sued by Goma for allegedly marginalizing him in Romania and for having tainted his reputation by referring to him as an anti-Semite and a Holocaust denier. The case is pending in court, and this is the last reason for my ambiguous title. I simply did not want the conference organizers to become entangled in the case, which might have happened were I to have mentioned Goma's name in the title of my presentation today. What I'd like to do now, ladies and gentlemen, might come as a surprise to you after this introduction. I'm going to try to understand Goma and his motivation for the transformation. Or if you want, I'm going to share with you some thoughts on why Goma has continued to follow the Solzhenitsyn model rather than to embrace the Václav Havel model. To do so, and as a provocation, I'm going to state the following. Post-communist East Central Europe is suffering, among its other maladies, from a clash of memories. Like historiography, memory can be and has been silenced by totalitarian regimes when and if it contradicted those regimes' socialization purposes. But unlike historiography, memory cannot be erased. It cannot be placed on the shelves with limited access in public libraries. Neither can it be stopped from transmission from generation to generation by a competitor socializer such as a family. While deviously whispered under totalitarian regimes, memory breaks out unrestrained once that regime is gone, including reminiscences of personal experience under the previous governments. What is more, while historiography is a privileged field of professionals, memory engulfs entire communities or entire groups within communities. Memory requires no footnotes against which argument must be checked. Memory just is, whereas when free, historiography places the has-been under question mark. It makes little sense to argue against memory, since memory is primarily sentiment, and sentiments know no professional boundaries. They are above all shared, which means that not only historians, not only politicians or writers, not just university or high school graduates, but also shopkeepers, blue-collar workers, and peasants constitute the makeup of memory. On the other hand, because memory is so much entangled with sentiment, it is often short. Personal experience comes to play a much larger role in memory than it ever did in historiography. There are things we would rather forget when it comes to our own behavior and that of our peers or our communities. We know from Paul Ricoeur that memory and forgetting are inextricable. And I dare add to this that this is to a large extent due to the powerful existence of a present dimension. This is precisely what happened to Paul Goma. But from this point of view, Goma is not an outsider of Romanian society, but a representative insider. Goma, in short, managed to turn into the opinion leaders of those parts of Romanian society, and they are large, just as they are large in those in Russia, with those parts that follow Solzhenitsyn, who believe that the Gulag, rather than the Holocaust, should preoccupy post-communist Romanian memory. Moreover, they believe that because of the preoccupation with the wrong memory, the Holocaust, the victims of the Gulag are being neglected. And furthermore, that this neglect is being imposed from abroad by the US, which is acting as Israel's puppet, or at least as its accomplice. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we are back to conspiracy theories. Let us illustrate that in the rest of the time I have. Goma's main thesis is the following. The Romanian Holocaust took place exactly 1 year before the Jewish Holocaust, when Romania was forced to handle in Bessarabia and Bukovina under the Soviet ultimatum, and the Jews played the main role of killing, destroying, spitting on, diminishing the Romanian military. The Holocaust itself started 1 year later, and it lasted 4 years. Our Holocaust started 1 year early, and it still continues. In other words, what Goma claims is that nothing would have happened in Bessarabia, in Bukovina in 1941, had not in 1940 the Jews allegedly played along the Soviets, and that ever since the parole among Romanians is revenge. He uses the word, the talion law, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Now, in so doing, Goma joins a plethora of post-89 Romanian historians in what is in Romania a parallel to the Jedwabne saga in Poland, but also elsewhere in the former communist countries. On what sources does Goma base his attention? In 5 minutes, I cannot go into the critique of the sources. Please believe me, it is an important one on no credible sources whatever. These are all myth. But for Goma, and not only for him, Romania has just changed patrons and is as enslaved to the US as it once was to the Soviet Union. But behind those US politics hides, of course, Jews and the Jewish interest. Goma states, starts with an example. The Jews in the Soviet Union used to be part of the privilegencia. When did they start to really be against the regimes? When they started losing those privileges. Then they all of a sudden became refuseniks. That, he says, has interestingly brought about a change in the US. While before, Jewish intellectuals in the US used to be good liberals who wanted a balance of terror and wanted to appease the Soviet Union, all of a sudden they turned into neocons, and all of a sudden they become anti-Marxist and anti-ideologists. In fact, he says, no change there or there. All they are doing is to be after Jewish power in one way or another. One is right back to the modern version of the protocols, of course. Nor does things stop at that. Embracing a canard spread by Koja, a very well-known negationist in Romania, Goma, in a postscriptum to the first version of this essay, commented in 28 May 2003 on a so-called secret accord between the governments of Romania and Israel, in line with which some 4,100 Romanian Jews would receive asylum in his country in case of a political catastrophe in Palestine. And why should Romania, he writes, a country bloodstained, martyred especially by the Jewish Bolsheviks in Bessarabia and Bukovina, grant asylum to those who ignore the concept and reality of asylum, Israel being the only state in the world that does not grant asylum to Goyim? Should we be more Christian than Christians? Should we grant asylum to our henchmen and their offspring? Do the Jews now in peril want another fatherland in order to do there what they did and continue to do to Palestine? To unroot olive trees and replace them by electric barbed wire? Jerusalem walls? To repeat what they did between June 28 and I don't bother you with date. Furthermore, when they leave Palestine, would they use against the, in quotes, Palestinian anti-Semite gas? Would they make use of chemical warfare? Biochemical? Would they leave behind as a humanist memento a tiny, tiny atomic bomb? But what will they do with the rest of 350 nuclear fuses? Would they bring them to Romania in their renewed exile? Would the same Jews leave behind a desert similar to what they laid waste in Europe between 1917 and 1989, and in Cuba, China, North Korea, later on in the name of Marxism, Zionism, Bolshevism, everywhere? I assure you, they will end by hastily proceeding to ruin the United States of America. Now, I have finished, if you leave me one sentence. This is terrible, and I have more terrible, things that are more terrible. And yet, ladies and gentlemen, if I had the time to read to you a quote which it clearly comes out that Goma is not even claiming to make history. He asks for his right to memory. I cannot admit such a right to memory even to a writer. Of course it is his right, but there are laws. But may I add, in continuing what I said the other session, not everybody in Romania is Goma. He has many supporters. It does not depend on his having less supporters, only on our telling our part of the stories, but also on hearing theirs. Unless we are ready to do that, we are doomed to the same mistakes again and again. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shafir. Our next speaker is Heiromonk Jovan Culibrk. He was born what used to be Yugoslavia. He studied languages, South Slave languages, and literary criticism in Banja Luka and in Zagreb, and theology in Belgrade and in eastern Sarajevo. He's now teaching at the St. Peter's Theological College at Centinja in Montenegro since 1993. And from 1990 on, he has been and still is coordinator with respect to the cooperation of the Serbian Church with NATO on Kosovo. In 2003, he studied at Yad Vashem and began his master studies at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He's also coordinating the Jasenovac Committee of the Serbian Orthodox Church. He has edited several books and published a large number of essays and articles. The topic of his presentation is the challenge of multiculturalism, the failure of Yugoslavia. Please.
Thanks a lot, Professor Pelinka. We are neighbors. At least we used to be neighbors. But you told a few things, and I used to. A few years ago, you mentioned that I'm working with NATO. I was talking to General William David, commander of the 101st Airborne American Division, and well known from the movie Black Hawk Down. He was the one who rescued Rangers from Mogadishu, personally. And he asked me about what do I think would be a relationship between Slovenia and this, and I said, listen, dear General, I'm born in Bosnia. I got my first BA in Zagreb in Croatia. I got my second BA in Belgrade in Serbia. I served the army in Slovenia. I was baptized in Macedonia. I became monk in Montenegro, and I'm here with you in Kosovo. So I'm living proof that Yugoslavia still exists. So since like that, I have to say that it's very hard to accept a situation in which Yugoslavia still does not exist. Why? Because I don't believe that any of the Yugoslavian nations went out of Yugoslavia same as it came to Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia affected us all, and I'm deeply aware of the fact that Yugoslavia still exists. Why I'm telling it? Because here we are to speak about anti-Semitism, which means situation in which Jews are living here, there, or are treated, related in this country, in this system, from this group, from this point of view. Former Yugoslavia, as we all know, has two phases. One is before the Second World War, and according to the remembrance, according to the literature, according to science, if you want to say, Second Yugoslavia has two important things for the Jewish people. First, it was a most diverse, most dispersed community, culturally community that almost ever existed. It brought in one country Ashkenazim from the north and the Sephardim from the south, people from Sarajevo, people affected by Shabtai Tzvi, for example. Not to mention that his grave is just a few kilometers from my monastery in Montenegro. And that Rabbi Ben Al-Kalai is of Sarajevo, that Herzl parents are married in Belgrade. So there is a lot of Jewish history in a very small Jewish community. It all came out in that Serbia, as a kingdom of Serbia, was the first country in the world to support Balfour Declaration in 1917, already in December, by the virtue of Vincic's letter. Kingdom of Serbia supported the creation of the Jewish national home, and even the name Israel was mentioned in that letter. So everything came out in Yugoslavia before the Second World War, and until 1940, when the government became to let's say to become close with Germany at the time, and when the first anti-Jewish measures were introduced, Yugoslavia was a pretty open country. The top leaders of Zionism at the time visited, worked there, propagated their goals. In World War II, we all know what happened. That vibrant Jewish community almost disappeared. After the World War, there is something that I want to talk about. We have two Yugoslavias. We have one Yugoslavia that supported the forming of a Jewish state, that supported arming of a Jewish army. The arms from Czechoslovakia went through the port of Fiume, of Rijeka, to Palestine at the time. And then we have Yugoslavia that from 1953 and very actively after 1965 and 1967 became one of the champions of the anti-Zionism, which we all know that is a second word for anti-Semitism. What happened with that country? Very often my Jewish friends ask me that. And I want to say a few words about that Yugoslavia. What happened? In Yugoslavia happened revolution, but not communistic revolution, not socialistic revolution, not Bolshevik revolution. It happened Titoistic revolution. Titoistic revolution means that Yugoslavia was a country that is a probably unique example in the world of the country that completely diminished memory. It's not only country with amnesia. Amnesia is an illness. It was country that openly and heavily fought against the memory. What memory? First of all, the remembrance of the World War II. As a difference with the other socialistic countries, Yugoslavia did not draw its, and the regime, Tito's regime, did not draw its legitimacy from the class fight. On the opposite, it drew its legitimacy from the fight against Nazis, fascists in the World War II. So it means that legitimacy of one government had to be built daily for the years, for the decades, on the fact that we fought against them. It means it was Yugoslavian people and Yugoslavian nations. Then, how to agree with the fact that a large number of Yugoslavians, let's say, was as Raoul Hilberg put it for independent state of Croatia, satellites par excellence. That Slovakia and Croatia were the most supportive countries of the Nazi regime. How to go on into the fact that was Ustashi regime, and Ustashi are not Nazis and also not fascists. That Ustashi regime was the main tool in the elimination first of the all independent state of Croatia Jews, which means Bosnian Jews, Sarajevo Jews, the same as Jews of Croatia, and the Jews of Srem, which is part of Serbia. That was all. They were all the questions that that regime has to answer. How they answer it? Main tool of Tito after the Second World War was the Yugoslavian People's Army, not party, not even police, but Yugoslavian People's Army. So army was a state within the state, Tito's Praetorian Guard and everything. In the in the first edition of the military encyclopedia, which means Encyclopedia of Tito's Yugoslavia, there is no word of Jasenovac. Jasenovac is a concentration camp settled by Ustashi, where supposedly hundreds of thousands of people disappeared. Several tens of thousands Jews, and the rest are Romas and Serbs. There is no word about it. Immediately after 1945, whole camp was erased to the ground, which was finished until 1947. There is no possibility to make a monument as it is Auschwitz today, because we have only empty field. There was no state memorials, no state events concerning victims of the genocide and Holocaust in Yugoslavia until the late 60s. Why? I will tell you. Because state had to develop tools how to treat it. And the tool was found in a culture. In 1953, after the Yugoslavia broke up with Soviet Union, after the coming closer to the West, in 1953 there was a Congress of the writers of Yugoslavia in Belgrade, where the completely new artistic approach was achieved. It was, later we will call it, socialistic surrealism. It's style that it goes further. It is not anymore figurative art, as it was in a socialistic realism, but it's an abstract art visible in architecture, in the literature that took some traditions from the modern novel. Not to mention sculpture or visual arts, and that art, beginning with half of the 60s, was used as an art in memorial events, memorials, and everything concerned events in World War II. Second, in a historiography, there was no way that one can manage genocide or Holocaust. The word Holocaust appears in official historical reviews in 1997. There was no Holocaust before in the historiography in former Yugoslavia. So, what I want to say, a whole state apparatus was involved in an abstract memory, first in finding the tool, and from the half of the 60s in applying the tool of that abstract memory, and the only two communities and only two institutions that they were somehow managing to keep identity of victims and the fact they were killed before of their ethnic and religious origin were the Serbian Orthodox Church and the Jewish community. Only publications that one can find something about Holocaust were the publications of a Jewish community. Only memorial events for decades were the events that Serbian Orthodox Church used to held on the place of the concentration camps. It was burned ground. On the other side, we had Yugoslavia, that has a very favorable place in the West, with a school at Korčula, with Adorno, Horkheimer, with Habermas coming to Yugoslavia, holding conferences on open Marxism, until the 70s. What was happening? Yugoslavia, in fact, has two lives, and I'm here witnessing both of them. That Yugoslavia, in that fight for identity, which was destroyed as a basic spine of a Western civilization, of the Judeo-Christian civilization, if we want. On the other hand, in that crisis of identity produced the culture That was a great culture. And I will take two examples. 2 poems were written during the World War II about the genocide that happened in a former Yugoslavia. One from a Muslim writer called Skender Kulenović, from a noble Muslim family from Bosnia, and the second from Croatian writer Ivan Goran Kovačić. Skender Kulenović wrote a scream, not a poem, but the scream Stojanka Majka Knešpoljka, about what he saw during the offensive, German offensive on Kozara in 1942, where, by the way, Kurt Waldheim played an important role. And Ivan Goran Kovačić wrote about pits that he saw when he came to the partisans. What happened? In a Skender Kulenović's poem, we have exact mentions of the memory, of the place, of the people, who did the crime, who was killed. Everything by identity. In a Kovačić's poem, it's about abstract criminal and an abstract victim. What do you mean? Which one was used in a state events and the state memorials of the World War II? Of course, Kovačić, because nowhere is mentioned who was the criminal and who was the victim. What I want to tell, with all flowering culture, with all flowering freedoms that we saw on the surface, underneath, we had a very strong stream of the directed memory, of abolished memory, of enforced oblivion. That was a law. Who didn't respect that law was or punished, or he had the only big difference with the East, he had a chance to vote with his passport and to leave. And the third thing, only place where it was possible to talk about Holocaust, it was a culture. For example, in Yugoslavia, one can see Knight Porter, one can read Saul Friedlander's book about role of the Pope in a Holocaust for a few months. It was published and then disappeared. One can read even Katzetnik's book, Beit Habobot. It was possible for a half of a year until it disappeared from the shelves. Yugoslavia was a very strange country. But that Yugoslavia was preparation what sadly came in 1991. Why? Because we all know what happened in the 90s, but that what happened in the 90s was prepared, deeply prepared by diminishing of a memory, and that's my basic attitude, and that's what I want to tell you all. As that idea comes also the attitude of that country towards Israel, because Israel, as a land that preserved memory, not only memory of the ancient memory of a Jewish people, but also memory of the events in World War II, was a threat to identity of the abstract Yugoslavian identity that was imposed on its peoples. Israel was something that cannot be allowed to enter life of Yugoslavia because it could be dangerous. Simply because a large part of identity of a contemporary Israel, especially after the Eichmann process, was based on the remembrance of the Shoah. To allow, with all socialistic similarities, affiliations, and everything, such a country to influence Yugoslavia, it will be that threat. I still remember the day after the bombing of Ozriak reactor, and I mentioned it many times to my friend here, Shimon Epstein. We spoke day after Ozriak reactor was bombed. For the first time, we had argue in the streets in Bosnia. Yugoslavia is a pro-Arab country, we were supposedly to condemn things. But I was 16 years old, and I don't remember even one of my Serbian friends who condemned the thing. So it was not only ambiguity in that country, it was a deep schizophrenia. Because all of us who didn't condemn it had hundreds, tens, dozens of relatives killed in the World War II. And that situation in which one was prevented from the memory, and the second was abolished, created a situation in which memory could be manipulated. Manipulation was easy if you don't know what to remember, if you don't know exactly what happened, if you know just what happened with your family, but you don't know whole picture. If you are full of anger because some of the main criminals lived in your street until the 70s, and other people was afraid because nobody spoke about partisan revenge after the World War II, which was also the fact of the former Yugoslavia. It was all forbidden, and all victims were abstract victims of fascism, and we were anti-fascists. Who were fascists? Nobody knew. I will just end with a thing that I started, that and what I want to say, I'm not sure that people in Europe or everywhere, anywhere else understood what was going on. So I will end with a saying of my friend Marcel Stefančić Jr., who was coming from the circle where now very famous Slavoj Žižek came. He said that former Yugoslavia was unconscious of Europe because it had in itself Western Catholic or Protestant world, Eastern Orthodox world, even Muslims, different Slavs, non-Slavs. Former Yugoslavia was small Europe. And that way that Europe treated former Yugoslavia is the way that Europe unconsciously is treating itself. Supporting historical absence of a memory of former Yugoslavia meant that Europe has a deep and serious problem with its own identity, even a problem with identity, problem with oblivion of her identity. Therefore, Europe has a problem with Israel, same as it has former Yugoslavia. That's it.
Thank you. The third speaker is Dr. Leonardo Senkman. He teaches modern history of Argentina and Brazil at the Latin America Studies Department of the Hebrew University. He is also research fellow of both Truman Institute and Institute of Contemporary Jewry, Latin American division at Hebrew University. He's currently the director for academic programs in Latin America of the International Center for University, and is teaching of the Jewish Civilization Hebrew University. His main interest is research in the history of anti-Semitism and populism in Argentina, about Jewish immigrants and refugees, about ethnicity in Latin America, and the construction of collective identities among immigrants. He has published 4 books and edited 3 others in collaboration. His topic he is going to present here is multiculturalism and anti-Semitism in Argentina. Please.
I am going to talk about Argentina alone, and I won't be pretentious to make extension and to include all the Latin American republics and all the Latin American communities. This is my first declaration to the public. After the large number of Jews among the victims during the last military dictatorship in Argentina, the restoration of democracy raised high expectations for putting an end to human rights violation and Judeophobia. The transition to democracy enabled Jews' full participation in civil society, and the reestablished principle of cultural pluralism contributed largely to breaking new ground for their social legitimacy as integrated citizens in Argentina. Cultural, ethnic, and religious events, which constitute the institutional activity of the Jewish community in the country, gained considerable exposure in the mass media and the public sphere. However, the worst anti-Jewish attack has been ever perpetrated by international Islam terrorism, assisted by the local connection, precisely perpetrated during the democratization process, put an end this process. Both massacres on the Israeli embassy in 1992 and then in 1994 on the building of the AMIA demonstrated that anti-Semitism continued to be a plague, although the Jew as a collective enjoying a without precedent social legitimacy by the democratization process in Argentina. Two concurrent processes are taking place in this country after the unsolved lethal bombing, which paradoxically granted a higher esteem and status to local Jews. On the one hand, the more pluralistic and democratic that Argentine civil society becomes, the more politically incorrect traditional anti-Semitism becomes, though it won't disappear. On the other hand, the more the judicial investigation of both criminal attacks are becoming tangled and unsolved, the more the Jewish community are valued and appreciated by non-Jews because they are deeply involved in fighting for democracy and against impunity. However, the fact that Jewish umbrella organizations and family groups representing the victims of Israeli embassy and AMIA bombing have succeeded in gaining respectability and much attention precisely for their demand for justice in the Argentine public sphere merit analysis about the interplay relation between democracy, pluralism, and anti-Semitism. Paradoxically, the plight of the victims of both attacks that the Argentine judicial system still fails to solve has in fact resulted in relating to them as the recipient of, the quotation mark, top citizenship compensations. I argue in this paper that Jews were compensated precisely because they are perceived as victims of a defenseless democracy in which most citizens are increasingly losing trust in republican institutions, especially the judicial system. However, this loss of popular confidence coincided with an increased awareness about the allegedly benefits of being victims in a pluralistic democracy. Since the middle years 1990, the full access of Argentine Jewry to the public sphere for demanding justice was perceived by some Jewish communal and general politicians, leaders, as the touchstone for the fight against impunity in this redemocratized society. AMIA cause was transformed into a symbol to all the country, and Jews became more Argentines, being granted full citizenship by the democratized public opinion precisely because they participate together with other Argentine citizens in the common fight against impunity and violence. However, this sort of upgrading citizenship to a differentiated ethnic group is a very paradoxical compensation, since the Jewish institutions in Buenos Aires today are fenced by cement blocks, marking symbolic boundaries between outside and inside, the public street of the citizens and the protected ghetto of the Jews. As Laura Glanks pointed out, I quote, the fence built a threshold before the Jews. Inside the fence, the Jew is just a Jew. When he passes to the outside, he becomes a Jewish citizen. Furthermore, this new sort of citizenship granted to the Argentine Jew in merit of being allegedly a victim of terrorism that the Argentine justice fails to solve, collapsed when the judiciary revealed its limits to prosecute anti-Semitic criminals. This occurred 10 years after the Amia bombing, when a scandalous verdict of non-guilty was given in 2004 by the Federal Public Tribunal, which decided to free all the prosecutors among the entire policy brigade suspected of being involved in the bombing. This scandalous fiasco of the Amia case evaporated completely the scarce trust in Argentina's justice and prompted many Jewish leaders to support the radical position adopted by Memoria Activa groups. As early as July 1999, to accuse the Argentine state of denial of justice before the Inter-American Committee of Human Rights of the Organización de Estados Americanos, the Organization of American States. Notwithstanding the sensitive implication of this judicial fiasco, the government tried to minimize the significance of certain sectors of Jewish community leaders to accuse the Argentine state before international court. Never before Jewish community and government relations reached such confrontational peak. This is not a case of ethno-national diaspora claiming for justice outside of national boundaries, because the simple reason that Jewish community is made up in Argentina by Argentine citizens and not by foreign immigrant Jews. Transnational practice, action and claim of Argentine Jews who feel deprived of justice must be understood not in the restricted field of third or fourth native generation of immigrants. The principal cause of their new assertiveness is Argentina Jews' sense of abandonment by the local justice and their need to defend their lives and communal institutions by themselves. The Israel government provided political and logistical assistance to the Argentine Jewish community in their endeavors to protect themselves and their interests. However, serious criticism against the low profile of Israel pressure were voiced by organizations of family victims of the two bombing attacks. Consequently, Jews feel that were left alone to fight for justice at local and international level alike. Such new assertiveness of the Jewish community, it is neither a case of a transnational advocacy networks of ethnic and religious activists aiming at working locally and globally to protest against terrorism and violation of human rights. Instead, to take the case of Argentina community in the 1990s, I prefer to conceptualize it as a case of our old transnational descendant of immigrants community, more affected by the damage inflicted to citizenships of its members rather than to its ethnic collective identity. Argentine Jews for decades have been a most over instance of a transnational community with public loyalties to both Argentina and Israel, although they are not a case of an ethno-national diaspora residing long time in a host country. Instead, Argentina Jewry is an ethno-community committed ideologically, economically, socially, and politically mobilized on behalf of Israel without considering this country as their homeland. Although Jews were Argentine citizens, they also exhibited a growing sense of solidarity and responsibility for the plight and fate of the Jewish people around the world. Consequently, Argentina Jews has a deep sense of belonging to the Jewish diaspora and share one of the foremost issues of the study in the study of modern ethnic diaspora, the will of their members not only to maintain and nurture their ethno-national identity, but also to be identified as such and to organize and act within the framework of diaspora and Israeli organizations. This ambiguity to be Argentine citizens and simultaneously members of an ethno-national community of all stock of immigrants is not restricted to Jews alone. Patterns of national inclusion for immigrants collectivities have been legitimized in Argentina, but migrants were not allowed to form national minority diasporas in this country. However, second, third, and even fourth generation citizen Jews in Argentina are still formally and informally considered and widely referred to as members of the Jewish community, or in Spanish, miembro de la colectividad judía. Conflict of dual identity and transnational linkage of Argentina Jews with Israel and the world Jewish diaspora living in a national state has been well researched. But the novelty posed by the unsolved two bombing cases, especially the AMIA case, reside in different action local Jews started to take in the field of political and ethnic transnational network. And this is the core of my paper. The readiness of Argentina Jews to become more assertive and to take a more confrontational strategy in both the national and international sphere pose new challenge to the local communities relating to the loyalty issue. Until now, the local public arena seems to be unsuccessful for achieving justice. The most political strategy in the international arena employed by Argentina community was through Israel diplomatic pressure and of various kinds of lobbying through US jury. I argue in this paper that this specific action for demanding justice by Argentina Jews in a transnational sphere, crossing the national boundaries, is affecting both their collective identity as Jews and as Argentine citizens. This process is twofold. On the one hand, democratization and liberalization of civil society tend to make Argentine authority more aware of the necessity to promote ethnic pluralism and even multiculturalism. In this vein, the government is more attentive to the plight of the Jewish community, thus enhancing world-Jewish community relations, including Israel. On the other hand, as a result of the reinvigoration of ethnic public behavior and new assertiveness of the Jewish community, the government is worried about the increased militant action of Argentine Jews as ethno-national diaspora whose international links allegedly would damage the image of Argentina. If Israel involvement in the rescue operation during the AMIA blast raised suspicion of dual loyalties, Undoubtedly, the possible accusation against the Argentina state before an international court may have considerable potential to trigger suspicion, tension of loyalties, and confrontation between Argentina Jews and local authorities. The case in point is some conceptual explanation and clarification in the field of transnational action taken by this particular Latin American diaspora community. First of all, it is not a case of overlapping membership in different political communities who are victims of terrorism and anti-Semitism claim for justice on the ground of dual citizenship or dual nationality. Secondly, Argentina jury during the 1990s were not similar to immigrants claiming membership in more than one place in order to demand justice. However, after the fiasco of Argentine justice to prosecute the criminal responsible of the 1992 and 1994 massacres, some Jewish Argentine leaders contest the assumption that transnational field for justice would weaken integration of Jews as Argentine citizens. On the contrary, they share the view that the recovery of democracy in Argentina is actually enhanced by public recognition of transnational multiple identity for citizens of migration origin, Jews included. In the same way that must be recognized dual citizenships and multiple identities for migrants from many other origins. After the dictatorship era and its legacy of authoritarian and discrimination against the citizens, democratization in Argentina brought about a pluralist model of coexistence that made Jews enthusiastic because of its new window of possibilities recently opened for them. Unlike the old liberal assimilationist Argentine creed that placed the immigrant Jew inside the nation, if he would accept to be an assimilated Argentine citizen, the new liberal pluralist model developed the paradigm of identity politics for each ethnic communities, including the Jews. Accordingly, this liberal paradigm allowed each ethnic and cultural group to strengthen its difference while respecting the national domain of common norm and institution. This approach of ethnicity highlights more a demand for a more nationalized ethnicity than a transnational diaspora. Not surprisingly, this approach has been proposed by democratic philo-Semites in the name of a national identity politics in Argentina. I argue that, in my paper, that in the years elapsed immediately after the restoration of democracy in Argentina, anti-Detashi bombing of 1992 and 1994, the organized Jewish community reshaped a new Jewish Argentine identity grounded on ethnicity and cultural difference, but in terms that would confirm the new paradigm of liberal pluralism. This strategy aimed to enjoy legitimacy in Argentina according to a rehabilitative concept of ethnicity. And I claim in my paper that this conception and this such interpretation of ethnicity politics came to a dramatic final revision when the bombing and when the fiasco the fiasco of the AMIA case, and I tried to develop another conceptual notion as the transnational jury, for example, that some intellectual and few leaders of the Argentina community started to develop in order to replace the old concept of diaspora. Thank you.
Thank you. The floor is open, and please use again, as it has been the case before, the microphones, yes, and yes. Sorry, whatever. We still have time for everybody, I think. Yes, please.
Yes, just a few answers quickly. As far as the problem with Gomez, I'd like to know who is bankrolling him, how great is his influence, and what is Israel trying to do to against this? I mean, any offensive Israel's doing. As far as Kosovo is concerned, Serbia, I understand that at the end of the 19th century, the Serbs were 90% of the population of Kosovo, and today they're about 10%. What lessons can Israel gain from that? You talk about the memory of Yugoslavia. Do the Yugoslavs, or the former Yugoslavs, do they accuse Germany as being responsible for the start of the disengagement or the breaking up of the of Yugoslavia? Thank you.
Okay. Maybe we'll collect 3 or 4 questions. Okay, yeah, well, please.
Okay. Rochelle Seidel. Leonardo, I just want to understand something. You said that Jews are defined in Argentina as members of the Jewish community, and that seems not to be good. Does that mean you're not defined also as Argentinians? Because in the United States, my grandparents came 100 years ago, and I'm defined as a member of the Jewish community in the United States. I have no problem about that. I mean, but nobody questions that I'm also a citizen of the United States. It's only when I became Israeli that I became Anglo-Saxon, but that's another story. So, I mean, I just want to understand, is there something in the society that makes that a bad thing? Because I don't think in the United States it's a bad thing to be defined as a member of the Jewish community. It's like, that's who I am. So I just want to, if you'll clarify that. Thank you.
Well,
I'll just be very brief. And the question is directed to Professor Michael Shafir about Borgoma. The question is psychological one, because you said, I'm going to try to understand Borgoma, and I understand you because you were very disappointed. A very good friend who became anti-Semite became Holocaust denier. Maybe I'm wrong, but the question is, for Borgoma, Romania has always been, if I understand it correctly, his psychological mother, so to speak. It is a motherland. He's going out, he's so offended, so angry because the United States or Israel, whatever he thinks, or the Jews in 1941 or 1940 have contributed to the loss of Bessarabia and to the loss of Bukovina and so on. So it's like he's reacting psychologically like a child whose mother has been offended, his mother has been attacked or truncated or dismembered. Now, why did it occur in 2002 and why did it not occur before? If this is the psychology of Paul Golan.
no.
Two questions. One to Michael. I know you a lot of years, and I never saw you so upset. So tell us what is so special in Goma that makes you so upset. When you know what is anti-Semitism, you know that it's quite easy to come from philo-Semitism and to become an anti-Semite. You know the structure, you know the pattern, and suddenly you are upset. And Jovan, a question to Jovan about Yugoslavia, and my question is, of course we have already a discussion about the question, was there an alternative? Was there a possibility for Tito to build or to rebuild a federation of nations when everyone knew that the nation did not behave on the same way during the war, the Croatians and the Serbs, and was it possible to build a federation and being explicit concerning the Croats and the Serbs during the war?
Yeah, and 2 more questions.
Too many. I mean,
Well,
I don't remember the first one.
okay, well, sorry. The protest, the protest from the podium here. Please wait. Please wait. Okay. Okay.
We'll wait.
Same order as before. Please use, but you should use the microphone here. This doesn't work.
how can I tell you? Imagine a situation in which try to imagine a situation of the time of the resistance. You didn't have too many models. You had one or two among the writers. Goma was the only model to follow in Romania. He was impeccable. He stood up against the communists. He was very courageous. And he showed no trace of anti-Semitism, whatever. That was good enough for me. Then he goes to Paris, becomes more and more isolated. I don't know what's wrong with the man. I could give you a very cheap explanation. He's married to a Jewess. Okay. But that does not make, it did not make me an anti-Semite. Who's more behind it than he is. It's not only the question of anti-Semitism, it's the question of quarreling with everyone, which happened before that, before his bout of anti-Semitism. And when I said I want to understand Goma, what I had in mind was still to understand how the mechanism works, but I didn't have the time to work it out. I mean, it was too short. What I'm trying to say is that if you read it, he just actually sincerely writes, I'm not writing history, I'm writing memory. Memory I have from my mother. I wasn't there when they took my father. That's what my mother told me. I didn't know what the Jews were. We had one Jew in the village. And I asked my mother who were the Jews. And my mother said the Jews were those who took your father. Stop. What is interesting is that Goma writes at one point that he is a hero, he worships Marshal Ion Antonescu. Do I know what he did unto the Jews? Of course I know what he did unto the Jews. I didn't see it. But I felt what he did unto me. He liberated me. So I know somewhere there, I'm conscious that he did that to the Jews, but I still see him as a great liberator. And I see the Jews.
It's not Khmelnytsky in Ukraine, the same thing.
Okay, yeah, it's not. And then I was asking to ask you to go and compare. There is a second great Romanian writer living in exile. I'm convinced he's much greater than Goma, but c'est une question de goût. It's literature. His name is Norman Maier, and he happens to be Jewish. And for Norman Maier, Antonescu is the embodiment of evil. The two are aged the same, precisely the same. They were 5 when one invaded, his country was invaded. Maier was 5 was when he was forced into exile. And from this, my only deduction is, this is memory. Memory is always subjective. Now, I'm not going to take Goma with all those things he wrote and I couldn't tell you. I mean, with Goma, I cannot talk anymore. But there are a lot of small Gomas, not influentials, not big, but who feel like him, and I want to break through to them, because if I don't, then there's never be any way we can live together in that Romania where I live for, and in this world, if you want. Because their pain comes first. I have to find a way to get it. How influential is Goma? I didn't conduct a public opinion survey. He's extremely popular as a writer because he was a dissident. What's the money behind him? When I knew him, he was drinking tea and some soup, and he was while he was working. He was living in extreme poverty. You don't make a lot of money out of writing books. We should know that by now. Even if you write fiction, well, maybe a little bit more, but you then don't have a university salary. So I wouldn't fall precisely into his sin, conspiracy theory. It's probably no money behind it, no Arabs behind it. It's Goma's cuckoo. That's all. It's terrible. But that one more thing, Israel, to my knowledge, does not do anything about it, and thank God it doesn't do anything about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I had 3 questions. First was about Kosovo. That Serbs in Kosovo represented, I don't know, 90%, but for sure majority at the end of the 19th century, and now they were 10%, now they are about 100,000 people. Since 99, because since after the NATO entered Kosovo, about 250,000 fled province, and 4,000 more during the Albanian riots in March 2004. What to say? What we can learn, and that's what we already know. For 500 years we were under occupation, and we came back to Kosovo with the flag of Kosovo. So, all that story in Balkans is never-ending story.
Tradition of Serbia.
Absolutely, and I'm afraid it will continue because our small children are singing songs about Kosovo. So it's a never-ending story. What will be next? Does Kosovo will be independent? Yes, maybe it will be, but it doesn't say anything about 50 years, 100 years, 20 years. We don't know. We don't know, but for sure it's unfinished story because the way how it was treated from all of sides, Serbian, Albanian, and international, didn't brought any solution. Furthermore, it brought more complications and more complicated future. That's what we can say. What is and I deeply believe that Middle East, and especially Israel and Balkans, are mirroring each other, and therefore it's similarities with Gaza, Samaria, with Judea are visible. Similarities with Jerusalem are visible. What to say? We have to understand also one thing, which is can be very important answer. That situation in Yugoslavia, as it was accepted by international community in 1991, is a product of genocide in World War II. For example, in Bosnia, Serbs were a majority before World War II and minority after the war. What happened? It's clear. Hundreds of thousands of people simply disappeared. So to accept such a borders is something that leaves scar on a national identity. And knowing Balkans, again, as a historical place with a terrible sense of history, we don't know what can happen tomorrow. What is concerning Israel is that you have also demographic explosion in the Jerusalem, in the north, and the same, let's say, measures could be applied from that international community in Israel if you ask some of them. What does it mean them? As my friends say, okay, give me an address, where can I send a mail to that international community? I don't know. Okay, second question was a relationship of Germany with dissolving of Yugoslavia. We all know that the first country in the world who recognized the separation of Croatia and Slovenia from Yugoslavia was Germany. And I don't believe that is any nationalism to say that that recognition helped a war in a great extent. Personally, I can say, of course, there is no one Germany today, and it's a Germany with multiple voices, but I will say one voice. I met a German general in Prizren, in Kosovo. We spoke seriously about what we can do for the people to return, for the building of the churches. 150 churches has been destroyed since NATO came to Kosovo. And he looked at me and said, now it's your turn to be divided. Open statement. So, on the other hand, we have many people. Germany didn't went into the bombing of Yugoslavia easily, didn't participate easily. It's a great debate. It's a 2 days debate. We know what's going on with Peter Handke these days, that Heinz Prize was denied to him. And really, today's Germany is not Germany of 41. And happily, their army is not good as in 41. Third question was a very something that is my nightmare. Was it possible for Yugoslavia to succeed? And I have to say deeply that I'm completely schizophrenic on that matter. I don't know. One part of me say yes, and one part of me say no. And don't ask me to divide scholar from a person. I cannot. That's country that I was raised, country that I lived, country that I still have a deep identity in each of republics of former Yugoslavia. That is important thing. My identity, my personal, cultural, and any other identity still is coming from each part of former Yugoslavia, including Slovenia. My intellectual habitus, let's say, it's completely formed by contemporary Slovenian thought. I studied in Zagreb, that's my city. It's in my city. Great part of my worldview has been shaped by it. I'm talking about myself, but I'm talking about a large number of population that feel like that. And now it will be a long, long story about it. But on the other hand, to live further in a country that destroyed memory, it was impossible. It was a suicide for all of us. And I'm speaking about Serbs, especially. It's a complete suicide because you agree that that event that with Kosovo became an essential event, your national identity should be forgotten. It's impossible. And that is World War II, after the Battle of Kosovo in 1389, became a second formative event in our collective being, and that's something that I very firmly stay behind.
Thank you.
That's it.
Yes, first of all, I want to make a distinct differentiation between the liberal system in US and Argentina. That is the root of the misunderstanding. It's not the same. But in addition, I want to make a clarification about 3 successive moments of the recent history of Argentina that you must take into consideration. The first moment is the transition from dictatorship to democracy. That raised among expectation and among the Jews and not Jews alike, but especially among the Jews, they because they suffer a lot during the last military dictatorship in Argentina, they have been more and more expected to be a full citizens. This this expectation lasts only 12 years. Why 12 years? Because in 1983 start the redemocratization process. In 1992 and 1994 was perpetrated the two blasts against the Israel embassy in Buenos Aires and the AMIA building with a total of 140 deaths and a lot of injuries. During the first 10 years of democracy, of the democratization process, and for the first time, the Jews enjoys a new model of liberal pluralism. The new model of liberal pluralism granted to them recognition of their identity characteristic, their identity, collective identity, not only granted, were granted as individuals the right to teach or to learn Hebrew or Yiddish or to pray as an individual right. But for the first time, the principle of the identity politics was enacted in Argentina. Okay? Immediately after the blast in Argentina, AMIA case, especially the AMIA case, and the impunity, that is the point, the impunity, the failure of the justice, the justice system of Argentina to prosecute the criminals, provoke a tremendous and dramatic change in the perception among the Jewish people about their Argentinidad, about their involvement as Argentine citizens and Jews alike. In this point, the difference with America and France, where also has occurred and was being perpetrated blast, but were prosecuted the responsible and the criminal. That is the difference in Argentina. The fourth moment, I talk about three moments: redemocratization, blast, impunity. About the fourth have been taking place before 2 years before alone, when the tribunal that voiced the verdict free the brigade of police, the police brigade that were that were involved in the criminal action against AMIA. They decide, the certain sector of the Jewish community and intellectuals, to start action in the international level, to renounce to continuous trusting in the local and national arena, and to decided an extremist measure, that is, to accuse before the international tribunal in Costa Rica, los Estados Americanos, against the Argentine state, under the allegation of not provide justice and not provide security to the Jewish community. This is a unique case. It is impossible to compare, not to France, not to, of course, to England or another West societies.
Okay. I think we have already lost one question, but the last is, please, go ahead.
Only a question. I have two questions if the time is all. One, Professor Shafir. Michael Shafir addressed a very important topic connected with the clashes of memory. And from this perspective, he discussed the case of Paul Goma. He explains very well why his perception of Antonescu is so different, not from our perception, not to justify it, but to explain the sources. And the third problem which he approached is Goma's anti-Semitism. Goma's today the most important anti-Semitic intellectual in Romania. I'm not sure that the problem of repression of memory and the clash of memory explains, is connected to his anti-Semitic violent stereotypes against the Romanian Jews, against the American Jews, against Israel, against the Bible, against the prophets, and you know very well how many quotations. I don't see any connection between clash of memories, the repression of memory, and this kind of anti-Semitism. And I suffered for Solzhenitsyn. I know very well the anti-Semitic stereotypes in Solzhenitsyn's work, but to compare Solzhenitsyn's case with Goma, I feel we made a kind of injustice to Solzhenitsyn even today. And to Jovan's presentation, I have one question at this time. It's a very, very profound explanation of the situation in Yugoslavia. What do you mean by Titoism in connection with this oblivion of the past? Why is specific in Titoism different from the communist ideology in general to repress the past?
Okay, this was the last question. Two, please, if possible, short answers.
How can two Jews speaking about a goy and be short? An anti-Semitic goy. You may be right. You probably are right. However, there is no doubt to my mind, as I knew the man personally, and I didn't meet him once or twice. I met him many, many times over the time. That what triggered is this Bessarabia thing. From then on, I think the case belongs to the psychiatrist, not the political scientist, not it's just I don't have the instruments to deal with that. The second, I would also, if I may profit from Leon and add to this, what do you mean? It's very strange to me as a non-Yugoslav, it was strange to me to understand what Tito did to you before I met you, not now. Because he really created something that was not there and something that was disappeared with him. So it's even more difficult to understand what you regret about him. Is it that the man was the only one capable of holding that country together, and you would prefer such a monster, but at least he's a diplomatic monster, because he had that, but at least he was capable of holding it together? Was this, for your generation, something that was do you think it was as important for, I'll put it very bluntly, as important for a Serb as it was for a Montenegro? I'm not going now to ask a Slovenian because we know that and if you, when you finish that, we'll eat the midnight supper, because I'm supposed to explain to all that.
This was really the last question.
Yes.
From the last answer.
Okay. Well, one thing is important concerning Tito's ideology, that when we remember, let's say, ideology of Tito's time, we do not remember classified. We don't remember communism. We remember two words: brotherhood and unity. That was ideology of Tito's time. So he personally was, that ideology was personalized by him. He impersonalized by him. He was incarnation of that ideology. And that ideology he drew, his legitimacy came from the World War II. So means he was one who united people against, unified people against Germans and who knows, Italians. But behind that, first of all, as you said, memory one have to gush forth, and that was a Titoism meant suppression of memory. It was forbidden for me to say that, openly saying it. I didn't say it until now, and there is no reason, that Croatian Ustashi killed 337 members of my family. I could say that fascists did it, but it's not true. Italians doesn't have anything to do with it. And if one serious man wants to build a state, he cannot build it on such a lack of memory, on such a suppression of memory. So therefore I say it's my nightmare. I was not against what Yugoslavia was on the surface. It made me person as I am, but also it couldn't be done in such a way. So to end this, if I may, when my friends from all over the world asked me, so what do you think, what was needed? It was needed an imposed commission. Then now I'm speaking about a very utopistic thing, to solve the somehow general problems of former Yugoslavia, and then another one to talk about the future. And that was needed in 1985, 1986, 1987.
Thank you. Yes.